I'm Kusha Karvandi, and you're listening to Extrascribe Radio, the source for biohacking your health to reach your full potential. I created Extrascribe to provide people with a roadmap to working out. With our new workout app, you can get a custom workout program that adapts your workouts to your body type, goals, sleep quality, stress levels, and personal preferences. With live chat support, our workout app has become so comprehensive some call it a personal trainer in your pocket. Our users are seeing over 90% success rates with their goals because we take the neural approach to fitness, meaning we integrate movements and exercises that recalibrate your brain and body to prime you for rapid strength gains and fat loss. Check out the Extrascribe workout app in the iTunes App Store today. In today's podcast, I interview Fallon Morrell from Weston A Foundation. Sally is a journalist, chef, nutrition researcher, homemaker, and community activist. She's the author of Nourishing Traditions, the cookbook that challenges politically correct nutrition and the Diet Dictocrats. This well-researched, thought-provoking guide to traditional foods contains a startling message. Animal fats and cholesterol are not villains, but vital factors in the diet, necessary for normal growth, proper function of the brain and nervous system, protection from disease, and optimum energy levels. Miss Morell's lifelong interest in the subject of nutrition began in the early 1970s when she read Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Weston A. Called the Isaac Newton of nutrition, Price traveled the world over studying healthy primitive populations and their diets. The unforgettable photographs contained in his book document the beautiful facial structure and superb physiques of isolated groups consuming only whole, natural foods. Price noted that all of these diets contained a source of good quality animal fat, which provided numerous factors necessary for the full expression of our genetic potential and optimal health. Ms. Morell applied the principles of the Price research to the feeding of her own children, and proved for herself that a diet rich in animal fats and containing the protective factors in old-fashioned foodstuffs like cod liver oil make for sturdy, cheerful children with high immunity to illness. Hey everyone, we're here on Extrascribe Radio with the author of the book Nourishing Traditions, the cookbook that challenges politically correct nutrition and the Diet Dictocrats, with Fallon Morrell. Welcome, Sally.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So just to get started, could you tell the audience a little bit about you and your background?
Well, I like to say that my greatest qualifications are that I am a mother and I cooked in the trenches for many years for a very large family. So the challenge always is to cook food that's healthy, that your children will actually eat. And so I think I have had plenty of experience doing that. But anyway, the cookbook that I wrote is a combination of my love for cooking, particularly French-style cooking, and my desire to get the work of Weston Price more widely known.
Nice. Very good. And how did you come across Weston A. Price?
I was in the 1970s. I was doing a lot of reading on nutrition and health, and someone suggested that I read this book, and it definitely stood out, had a tremendous impression on me, largely because it verified me in what I was doing already. You know, I was cooking with butter and using lots of cream and, all these good fats, lots of eggs. Organ meats in the form of pâté, and so I kind of got validation that this really was the right way to go.
And so in your book, I see in the title it says, challenging the politically correct nutrition. What is politically correct nutrition?
Well, politically correct nutrition is the notion that animal fats are bad, saturated fats are bad, cholesterol is bad. So it has put Americans down the wrong path, using lots of vegetable oils, industrial oils, lots of carbohydrates. And this diet has been an absolute disaster. We've seen a doubling in rates of obesity since this started to be promoted. But what I am most concerned about is the adverse effects of this diet on growing children, because growing children really do need lots of fats, they need lots of cholesterol, they need vitamin A, which is in the animal fats, and they're not getting this if the parents are trying to be conscientious and follow the dietary guidelines.
Definitely. It sounds like some of your philosophies are similar to Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, who wrote the
Yes.
GAPS diet. How does it
Yes.
compare to her philosophies?
You know, it was really wonderful when I met her. Now, you have to understand, Dr. Campbell McBride is dealing with people who are quite sick, quite damaged, almost certainly because they were on these dietary guidelines. Did not get enough cholesterol and saturated fat while the gut was being formed, so they have leaky gut, all sorts of digestive problems, and this affects the brain learning and behavior. And of course, the brain needs cholesterol and saturated fat just as much as the digestive tract. So, but on all the basic things, we're in agreement. The need for fats, the need for cod liver oil, the need for bone broth. That's a big theme in my book, and they're very healing to the intestinal tract, and as well as being a fixture in French cooking and European cooking, and the proper preparation of grains. So all of the themes, and the lacto-fermented foods to put good bacteria into the gut. All of these are themes in my book, Nourishing Traditions, and it was really wonderful to meet someone who had come at this not knowing about Nourishing Traditions, a physician who just kind of thought this through and came to the same conclusions that I had come to.
So what would you say are some of the best fermented foods that someone could get?
The best fermented foods?
Yeah.
Well, of course, the standard fermented food is the real genuine sauerkraut. That's the easiest one to make, and we recommend that people have a little bit of sauerkraut every day. And then you have the fermented dairy foods, yogurt and kefir, and we recommend making these yourself, starting with raw milk. So those would be the two top choices for me.
That's awesome. And so when Weston A. Price traveled the world, what did he find exactly? What did he see?
So he went to isolated areas where people did not have contact with the West, and when they were on their native diets, he found beautiful people, excellent health. The people had naturally straight white teeth and very well-formed faces and bodies, so they were very handsome people. They did not suffer from cavities, and they were very robust. They had no trouble having babies, healthy babies, and they seemed to be immune from all of the Western diseases like tuberculosis, cancer, heart disease, and so forth. So first he verified that, yes, these healthy people are there, and then he said, well, now what is the underlying characteristic that keeps these people so healthy? Because all of the diets were obviously different. The Eskimo diet is different from the South Sea diet. And what he came up with was that these diets had very high levels of what we call the fat-soluble vitamins, vitamins A, D, and K, and they're found in the very foods that we're being told are bad for us and we shouldn't eat. So grass-fed butter, grass-fed egg yolks, whole grass-fed milk, organ meats, meat fats, and certain seafoods such as shellfish, fish eggs, and oily fish. So we need to get as many of these foods in our diet as possible. That's kind of my take-home message.
So no vegetarianism or veganism then?
No, not in any of the cultures he studied. Some were 100% animal foods. Some were maybe 10% animal foods, but all of them did have a certain amount of animal foods in the diet. There were no vegan or vegetarian cultures that he visited. And they put a tremendous emphasis on the animal foods. These were the foods that they valued the most.
And how much saturated fat should we be getting compared to poly and monounsaturated fats?
Well, you know, this depends. I don't want to sound vague, but in the Western diet, people tend to do better on a higher fat diet. So let's just say you're getting 50 to 60% of your calories as fat. I would say half of those should be saturated fat, and then maybe a third should be monounsaturated fats, and the rest should be various combinations of polyunsaturated oils.
Awesome. Yeah, when I talked to Dr. Campbell McBride, she said something about how kind of in nature, a lot of the animal fats or animal products tend to be pretty balanced. It's like usually 40%.
They are, yes. And one thing people don't realize, if you have a lot of saturated fat in your diet, you use the unsaturated fats properly First of all, the saturated fats protect the unsaturated fats from oxidation, but also you put those unsaturated fats in your tissues where they belong and conserve them there. So the saturated fats really are very synergistic with, the omega-6s and the omega-3s.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I've heard a lot about the omega-6 consumption in the American diet is far too high compared to our omega-3 consumption.
Yes, and that theme was introduced in Nourishing Traditions. It's interesting. That's one that's really caught hold with the general public. Yes, all of these industrial oils are mostly omega-6, and people are getting far too much of them and far too much omega-6.
Exactly.
But we do need some omega-6. I mean, what I find is sometimes people overdo on the omega-3s and they're not getting enough omega-6. So you need a balance.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So what supplements do you recommend then?
Well, our number one supplement, we really don't call it a supplement, we call it a superfood, is the high vitamin cod liver oil. That's made by the fermentation of low temperature fermentation of the cod livers. It's got twice the levels of A and D that any other brand of cod liver oil has. So this is something that we highly recommend, especially for pregnant women, growing children. I can tell you my grandsons, they get their cod liver oil every day.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had read something about how, prison inmates, they had very low levels of cholesterol, and they exhibited the highest levels of violence. And in Weston A. Price's research, apparently, he said there was very low levels of crime when he, found these civilizations that were eating high amounts of animal fats.
Well, he didn't quite put it that way. Dr. Price said there was very low crime when they were on their traditional diets, and not all of those diets were high in animal fat, I have to say. But they were very high in the fat-soluble activators in the small amount of animal foods that they ate. I'm thinking of the African diet now, which was actually quite high in carbohydrates and low in fat, but the animal foods that they were eating were just loaded with fat-soluble activators. So they turn the carbohydrates into saturated fat. That's what your body does if you aren't eating enough saturated fat. It turns the carbohydrates into saturated fats. But the key thing is getting those fat-soluble activators. But again, as I say, I think in the West, most of us do better with a high-fat diet. We certainly have all these fats available that they really didn't have available in Africa. So to me, that's the way we should go.
So in your opinion, what do you think is the true leading cause of disease and cancer and so forth?
Malnutrition. I mean, just one word. Dr. Price says we don't die of disease, we get disease because we're dying. And the disease is kind of secondary to the fact that the body is just not being nourished. It's not getting all the nutrients that it needs to function properly.
Yeah, it's very interesting because when I spoke to Dr. Campbell McBride, she says that she believes that there's no disease that's uncurable in her opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think if you're in terminal cancer and you've got 1 day to live, I'm not sure that you can guarantee someone that you can turn that around. So, and we all have to die someday. So I'm not sure I would make such a blanket statement. But I do think that most conditions are curable, especially if we start young enough.
Okay, so if you take the right preventative measures, you can sort of prevent or almost cure anything.
Right. And really, that starts before conception. And that was one of Dr. Price's great messages, that these traditional cultures, excuse me, that these traditional cultures prepared for pregnancy with very nutrient-dense foods, things like shark liver oil, liver, fish eggs, really high nutrient foods. Egg yolks, again, was another one that was used in China. And so they prepared for pregnancy with these nutrient-dense foods so that when pregnancy occurred, you had all the nutrients at hand that you needed to build a healthy baby.
So what are your thoughts on adaptogens and some of these Ayurvedic herbs and Chinese herbs that are out there? How does that play into all this?
I think they all have their place. Homeopathy, herbs, Ayurveda, Chinese medicine. I have a great respect for these kinds of healing systems. I have to say I don't know very much about them. It's not my area of expertise, and I would always say that they need to be complementary which means that they go with the diet. They're not going to work very well if you're not also changing your diet. If you're still eating the standard American diet and doing Chinese herbal medicine, I don't think it's going to help you very much.
Yeah, I agree. So what are your opinions then on what we need to do as a kind of a society here in America to make change? I mean, how are we going to change the perception?
I think it's going to be one person at a time. The traditional cultures that Dr. Price visited, they had a kind of group soul. They thought as a group. They thought as a tribe or a village. And that is not going to happen today. We've all sort of evolved, so to speak. Our consciousness has evolved, and we are individuals now. And I don't think this is going to happen with something coming down from on high, from the government or from changes in policy or anything like that. I think it's going to happen one individual at a time, one parent at a time, one family at a time. And when we reach a critical mass, then the government will follow. But right now, it's really up to each individual to make that change for himself. And you have to realize you're not going to get any help from the government in doing this. You need to look further. The truth about nutrition is not going to be handed to us on a silver platter. We really have to do the digging ourselves.
Now, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but do you think that the government is really in on this because they're profiting on it with the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry?
Well, there's no question that being sick is a big business. And I can well imagine, I don't think it's the average person who's caught up in the dietary guidelines or whatever. I think they're just innocently ignorant. But you do have to wonder if behind the scenes there are a few people guiding things that are saying, how can we make people really unhealthy so we can make money with drugs?
Yeah, I'd heard something like General Mills funds the nutrition education at many universities.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. These cereal companies are immensely profitable, and they want to make sure people keep eating their awful cereal,
And that's why it's at the bottom of the food pyramid, huh?
Yeah, right. It's base of the food pyramid, yeah. I think these breakfast cereals are somewhat addictive, actually. I know kids get on them, and they just can't stop eating them.
Oh, absolutely.
There's no nutrition in them. They've been extruded, which messes up all the proteins and makes them very difficult to digest and even neurotoxic.
Wow. So for learning, it completely screws them up for trying to learn and their development for learning.
Absolutely. You were asking earlier, what do we need to have happen? And unfortunately, but this is just human nature, usually people don't change unless there's a crisis, and often that crisis is a health problem in one of their children. And so many people have come to the Weston Price Foundation, come to our dietary guidelines, because they had a child who was very sick, and because they were loving parents and wanted to find out, what could they do to help their child. And so they learn about Dr. Campbell McBride's work, her GAPS diet. They learn about our work, and suddenly it's usually the mom says, we're going to make these changes, and then the whole family benefits.
That's great. So what about some of these fads out there like juicing and detoxes? So what are your thoughts on those?
I'm not a big fan of juicing, and this is the one place where I actually disagree with Dr. Natasha. I'm not a fan of juicing. I think the juices, first of all, they're pretty, to me, they make me gag, and I actually can't drink them. But they are not very appetizing. There are a lot of phytotoxins in plants, and so you're getting these in the juice. And they're just not very appetizing. I have never seen any evidence that they help you detoxify. Show me the evidence. Show me the studies. I think it's just a theory that's caught hold of people's imaginations. Vegetables should be cooked and served with a good fat, like fat back or butter or cream. Best way to have vegetables, in my opinion, especially for someone who has a hard time digesting things, is in a soup with a bone broth. So, I am not a big fan of this juicing. I think that there's something kind of medieval about this notion that you are impure and you've got to suffer with this awful diet to get these impurities out of you, sort of like hair shirts or something. And then the other one you were asking about was juicing and detox diet. It's funny you should ask that because we have an article in our upcoming journal. The journal goes to members of the Weston A. Price Foundation, so hopefully your listeners will become members and get this journal on detoxification and explains how the liver detoxifies. And the key thing that the liver needs to detoxify is saturated fat. So we think it's better to detoxify by nourishing yourself rather than by starving yourself.
No, it makes perfect sense. What about intermittent fasting? I hear a lot of people talking about, fasting for a whole day or fasting for like 16 hours and eating for 8 hours.
Yeah, I personally suffer from low blood sugar, and I can't do that. I have to have 3 meals a day or I can't function. So if you can do that and you feel okay, I guess I would say it might be okay, but there are some dangers here. I think it would be better if you want to give your digestive system a rest is to have a day when you just drink raw milk or a day when you just do bone broth. So you're still eating, you're still keeping your blood sugar up and nourishing yourself, but you do give your digestion a rest.
So why exactly is bone broth and gelatin so good?
Well, that's a $64,000 question, and I'm just coming out with a book. I've written it with Dr. Kayla Daniels called Nourishing Broth, and it's coming out at the end of September. And Kayla wrote the scientific section. She did a fantastic job, and I can only just give you an overview. First of all, in broth, you have all the components of cartilage. So it can help you build cartilage, and, cartilage is not just in your bones. There is, for example, a layer of cartilage in your intestinal tract, just behind the enterocytes. So the cartilage there is strengthened by broth. The gelatin broth helps you digest your food. It attracts the digestive juices. Another component of broth is glycine, which is a very important amino acid that helps us detoxify and also helps keep our mood stable. The glycine, along with methionine and meat, help keep dopamine levels balanced in people. And a lot of people have told us they just feel better. They feel more calm. They feel better able to handle things when they're getting a lot of broth. That's just a smattering. Broth can be very helpful in wound healing. I think of all these athletes with their injuries. All the baseball teams should have big pots of broth in the dugout or in the dressing rooms. I mean, that's what these athletes need to prevent injury and to heal their injuries.
Not steroids.
Not steroids, no. And, of course, the steroids, it's a quick fix, and the steroids work by robbing Peter to pay Paul. So they take nutrients from one part of the body, usually cholesterol. That's what steroids do. They sequester cholesterol and take it to where you need healing. But then you've stolen it from another part of the body where you're likely to get an injury later on.
Wow. That's crazy. That's good stuff. So what about fiber then? I know a lot of people are hell-bent on, taking a bunch of fiber supplements or, eating some fiber-fortified foods.
Well, you look at the Eskimo diet, they had no fiber. But they did have a lot of fermented foods. They fermented fish, they fermented meat, so they're getting lots of good bacteria. And we've now discovered that the bulk of the feces is not fiber, it's dead bacteria. So I think more important than fiber is these lots of good bacteria in your gut. Now, I'm not against fiber. I think most of the foods high in fiber should be well cooked, however. I think fiber can be quite irritating if it's not properly prepared.
So how long ago do you think it was when humans first kind of learned to start practicing all these methods of cooking vegetables and all these things
fermenting,
to get rid of them?
Yeah. That's a very good question, and I certainly don't have the answer. We know that cooking is associated with being human from the beginning. It's one of the distinguishing characteristics of being human, that we cook. Fermentation, I think it was just discovered accidentally. They left some let's just say some cassava around, and it will ferment. Same with the fish. They might have put the fish in the hole just to, and come back and eat it later, and then they come back and they find this fermented fish. So same with dairy. You just leave milk out and it will ferment. So I think this is easy to explain.
So what about like mold and mold toxins? When you put something out and it ferments versus something that is left out and it molds, how are the two different?
I think the difference is that the fermentation that's good takes place, in an enclosed vessel, or in the case of the fish, they put dirt on top of them, so it's not exposed to a lot of air.
I see. So the type of mold or bacteria that grows is different.
Yes. And mold is not necessarily bad, however. We get mold on our lacto-fermented foods. It's not harmful. You may not want to eat it, but it's not harmful.
What are your opinions on Dave Asprey's Bulletproof coffee and his whole Bulletproof thing that he's doing?
I'm not familiar with this. I think caffeine is not good. I do warn people not to get into the caffeine habit, and that means coffee, tea, chocolate, and soft drinks. What caffeine does, it's like a hammer to your adrenal glands. It gets the adrenal glands to excrete adrenaline, which wakes you up and gives you energy, but then the adrenal glands have to bring you back to homeostasis, and eventually you get adrenal burnout. So I do warn people against any kind of caffeine. I know it's very, very hard to get off of, however.
Oh, definitely. I used to drink a pot of coffee a day.
Oh, my goodness.
Not anymore, thank goodness. So where do you get a lot of your information? How do you stay on the cutting edge with all this stuff?
Well, I'm president of the Weston A. Price Foundation. I'm the editor of the journal, and so I do have to be on top of things. I have lots of people send me information, articles. I read in nutrition all the time. I write a column called Caustic Commentary, little paragraphs on things that are happening in nutrition. So I definitely have to be on top of all this. I have a big file. I have a kind of a strange filing system that I use to try to stay on top of everything.
Nice. So what books and resources would you recommend to the audience?
Well, I would recommend first and foremost that they read Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Weston Price. And then I would recommend that they spend some time on our website. Everything we've ever published is at westonaprice.org. I would recommend they become members, and that's very easy to do. Just click on the Join Now button on our website and get our journal, and that's really, in my opinion, the best way to keep up with what's going on in nutrition.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a member of you guys' program as well. I love the journal. I mean, that's the only way for me to really get the best information out there.
Oh, thank you.
So some really, really good information today. I really, love everything you're doing. But what's one simple thing that you would recommend our listeners start with today to improve their nutrition?
Well, I think a very simple thing they can do is start using butter, and none of the butter substitutes. No spreads, no margarine, and none of the industrial oils either. Use butter. Just start with butter, and I think and you can have as much butter as you want. I say put your butter on the vegetables and meat and everything. You'd be amazed how good things taste with plenty of butter and how satisfied you'll feel. Grass-fed butter is the best, and we do sell a shopping guide that's also available as an app, which gives all the brands of grass-fed butter that we recommend.
That's great. There's obviously a difference between grass-fed butter from unpasteurized raw milk and one that's coming from pasteurized milk, correct?
Well, obviously the raw, grass-fed butter is the best. That's the best thing you can buy, but it is hard to find. And surprisingly, the fat-soluble vitamins and the fats are far less damaged by pasteurization than the proteins. So I don't mind the pasteurized butter.
Okay, great. What about ghee? What are your opinions on ghee?
And ghee is great. And ghee is good for people who are really sensitive to milk proteins. So yes, maybe I should say the first thing you do is go to butter and ghee, or ghee.
Okay, great. Wow, some really awesome stuff today. I want to thank you again for being on the call today and being on Extrascribe Radio. If you haven't already, get your custom workout program by downloading the Extrascribe app from the iTunes App Store today.